Welcome to the York Daily Record Sunday News Editorial Board. My name is Scott Fisher. I am editorial page editor, and we are here today with Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture, Russell Redding. We're really glad you could join us today.
Honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand you were at a tour of a farm in Manchester. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there and what brings you to York County?
Yeah, so the visit was really to focus on Chesapeake Bay, and sometimes difficult to have folks appreciate that York County and Pennsylvania is a major contributor to Chesapeake Bay when you don't see the shorelines and boats and bay bridges. But the truth is that 90% of the water in the upper bay is from the Susquehanna. 50% of the total bay is Susquehanna. 41 counties of Pennsylvania flow into the Susquehanna, of course, into the bay. But being next to the Conewago and you're right there. I mean, it's sort of the bay starts in East Manchester Township.
The bay starts in East Manchester?
Well, I say that because that's the waters flow that way, right? So as we talk about the bay, what does that really mean? It means sort of local water. So the Conewago goes to Susquehanna, gets you to the bay. And this is Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week, and we really wanted to go out and talk to the farm community and say, what are you doing? How do you do it? How do you address the issues of both regulation, but how do you do it at the same time running a business and a successful business? So went to the Gross farm, Steve and Dan Gross today. Look at it, pretty amazing. Majority of what they've done has been just everyday good management practice.
Is that a dairy farm?
It's a beef operation, primarily crops, but they've got a few beef cattle. But they grow everything from sunflowers to making hay and making their own sort of bird seed.
Is that sunflower seed? Is that their farm?
That's their farm.
Because I ride my bike past it all the time, and it's beautiful when all those sunflowers are in bloom. It's great.
Yeah, so all of that is part of the Gross farm.
Okay.
Yeah, which all goes into bird feed, by the way.
Does it?
Yeah.
300
acres of seed that goes into the bag to feed birds and squirrels. Right here in York County.
They could just go and just build them.
Yeah, right. But one of these really nice stories, and the second part of that was they participated in a tax credit program that allowed them to buy some no-till equipment and do some planning, engineering work around the farm and the farm buildings. So we got a chance to look at that, talk about the farm enterprise, what they're doing to meet the requirements of the Chesapeake Bay program.
How closely does the Agriculture Department work with the DEP in terms of dealing with pollution issues and runoff and water issues? I mean, obviously, I guess DEP is primarily responsible for dealing with our bay goals and so forth, trying to meet the limits that the federal government has set. What is your role there?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So Pennsylvania is the only state that has a State Conservation Commission with a rotating chairmanship between the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of DEP on the 1st of July every year. It's the only one of its kind. And unique because it merges that environmental concern and interest and regulation with the agricultural concern and regulation. The primary sort of legal entity for the Chesapeake Bay program in Pennsylvania is DEP by way of agreement with the EPA, but all of the regulation for agriculture, ag production, soil, water quality, on anything sort of land, agricultural land, is under the Department of Agriculture. So you have to sort of work together, right, to make all that happen. And what you also we saw today was York County through the Planning Commission, coupled with the Conservation District, have taken the stormwater concerns with the Conservation District and land use and put all of that together. So it's really a great model.
Your county is a model in a sense with the stormwater. It's a regional stormwater management plan, right? Rather than sort of leaving it up to each little municipality.
Yeah, so there's 72 municipalities in York County. 43, I think, have signed on to the comprehensive approach. So those 43 contribute dollars and they rank the projects for stormwater. It's actually the way you want to do it, right? Instead of having 43 separate entities trying to sort of say, what do I do to address the stormwater? They say comprehensively, one, what does our comprehensive plan look like? So let's make the decision in that context. And two, knowing that these municipalities sort of influence each other, and what one does will impact the water quality of another. So York is a model. I mean, there's not another state that's doing sort of what we're doing within Chesapeake Bay region. There's not another county doing what York County is doing around stormwater.
So Pennsylvania is not meeting its goals, and we're constantly reminded that we're woefully behind in our cleanup efforts for the bay. What's happening on that front? How are we going to meet those goals? And obviously agriculture is a major component. I hear from farmers all the time, we don't need more regulations and so forth. So where are we on that effort?
Yeah, so this is part of the conversation that we've sort of rediscovered, I guess, in this whole Chesapeake Bay discussion, what we called this reboot, as you've heard about, and it really was sort of the state refocusing its efforts. That began under this current agreement in 2010 when the EPA sort of had a total maximum daily load, which is a legal document that says, by state, you have to, here's your baseline and here's your reductions between 2010 and 2025. The problem is, or at least one, is that decision was made on a Bay model that has a lot of different components to it. But from our standpoint, it's sort of missing one significant piece, and that is the non-cost share work, like Dan and Steve Gross. Majority of their work, not cost share. Cost share meaning there was a public investment, right? There was no public investment outside of a tax credit for a little bit of work. So in the model, all of that sort of everyday good management practice and voluntary work is not captured as part of Pennsylvania's contribution to, and therefore the model doesn't indicate that there's actually work being done that is, right? So what's happened in the last 6 months is interesting. So we'll continue to work on that model, and the model lays out a pretty aggressive reduction. And you're correct that we're sort of off the mark on phosphorus, not as much on phosphorus, a little bit on nitrogen and sediment. But what's interesting is that there's been two other sort of significant studies, one with the U.S. Geological Survey that has 117 monitoring stations in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. 31 of those stations are in Pennsylvania. Their water quality monitoring data says that Pennsylvania is actually doing a better job than what the Chesapeake Bay model says that we're doing. Reason, the monitoring is actually in water monitoring stations, so it's water quality. It's not about a factor and formula, it's actually output side. And then the University of Maryland Environmental Studies program just in the last 2 weeks came out with sort of a similar find as the USGS data, and says, for the third time since 2004, is that Pennsylvania's water quality is actually better than previous year and shows significant progress. So we've got work to do. I think our challenge is how do you, one, get credit for what we're doing, two, it really has to be a comprehensive approach. So it's what we do with farms, it's what you do with stormwater, it's what you do with on-lot septic systems, it's what you do with air deposition of nitrogen. There's a lot of components that go into that reduction. We just want to make sure that from an agricultural standpoint, which is carrying in this TMDL, is carrying the load, majority load of reductions of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. So we feel like we've got to get this right, and part of getting it right is making sure we give credit to the farms for what they are doing. And secondly, make sure, which is what the reboot is doing, is to make sure that we're also having some compliance check on that, right? So we have both a plan, you've got actions occurring, you've got water quality monitoring occurring, but we can actually say to the EPA that we are meeting the reductions that have set forth. So,
Your department doesn't do compliance or enforcement, right? Or is that a DEP function?
yes, this is where it is. So back to the State Conservation Commission piece, right? So the commission is housed in the Department of Agriculture, and some of it's a commingled staff between DEP and Ag. So those staff work with county conservation districts. So majority of the work for the Bay is done through conservation districts. So the districts, and part of the discussion we're having with districts right now, is that some of the districts in the Chesapeake Bay watershed have struggled with the new responsibilities of moving from education and planning to one of inspection and compliance. And York County is one that, at least to this point, has said that they really don't want to do the compliance checks. They prefer to do the traditional work of planning and education. So we're in those discussions right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other major issues within the agriculture department, and any other big initiatives that you've rolled out recently that you'd like to talk about? Anything that's kind of newsworthy that you're working on as a department right now?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, and part of this, discussion around the workforce and what we do within agriculture, food, in the environment, was informed by my time at Delaware Valley University as a dean, but also then coming back into the department. There's this constant question about where does the labor come from? And not just farm labor, but ag, food, and when you look at the very broad definition of agriculture. And every business is talking about sort of what they need in terms of employees. Part of it's what's happening on the federal level around our H-2A and H-2B program with immigration labor, and some difficulties there of just getting a functioning system, right? But the other big piece is the number of farms and transitions to a new generation. You have technology influencing every job, whether it's in the publishing business, right, or it's in food production. It's here, and that is influencing the type of person you're looking for, the skills and competencies you need. So we've taken this on because it's not an issue that rests solely with the Department of Labor. It's not just an education concern. It's not just Department of Commerce. It's all of us. And so we've taken this issue of workforce development and this whole sort of human capital question. Where does the human capital come from for ag in the future? And it's been a fascinating conversation because it gets you into the timber industry in Pennsylvania. It's on the sales service side, it's on the food inspection and the food processing. There's so many different variations of this. And the question is, where does somebody who has those skills and competencies, who may not be interested or thinking ag, become interested in ag, right? And how does somebody who's on the employer side find those individuals? So we've taken that on as a major piece of sort of our work, and feel like we can add some value to that conversation. It has not been easy to define, because it gets you into an educational conversation, and how does somebody in the middle school or even high school know that that there's a meaningful career pathway there around ag and the environment. But it's also, how do you take the folks who do have the requisite skills and sort of tilt them towards the ag industry. So that's been a great conversation, and we're looking at the top 25 jobs in ag, and overlaying how many actually have defined career pathways. So of the 25 that are top jobs, as you talk to industry and look at, only 9 have a defined career pathway. So you start backing into it and say, well, if these are real jobs that industry says they have or need, how does someone get into that pathway to get to that job?
What are the top 5 jobs that you've been talking about there?
Yeah, so you have, they're on...
Or 9, actually, if you want to.
Well, I think you have a couple of real top ones. One is around food processing. And many times we don't think of that as agriculture, right? Because there's this challenge of society sort of acceptance of what the traditional definition is and how that's evolved. But food processing is one. The sort of the green industry jobs, everything from horticulture and the plant science to sort of the landscape design, food and farm manager, one of the top. Surprisingly, one around sort of transportation is ag transportation. So that whole sort of delivery network, right? We normally don't think of them as sort of ag, but those jobs that are, folks with CDLs and the skills, sort of long-term transport is one. Veterinary science, and particularly large animal veterinary science and vet tech jobs are part of the top 9. It actually has a defined pathway for it. Conservation is one of the top jobs, both conservation planning, conservation design. So you take the 25, and they range from the farm level manager to somebody who's working in meat packing, and they're sort of the 25 jobs of the future. So we've looked at that and start to really address them. And in some cases have formed some pretty interesting partnerships. So there's 5 ag equipment dealers in the Lancaster County area who have come together with their own resources to develop an apprenticeship program that looks at mechanical and technology service jobs for equipment. And what they call the mechatronics position, right, is a fascinating discussion because they say we can find the mechanical skill. I can find even somebody with a great work ethic who really wants to do this, but they can't do the technology. They can't do the integration of data layers that's in the equipment and using one person to integrate all of that. So it's been fascinating. So they've said, okay, let's start a pre-apprenticeship program with the school districts around Lancaster County. And the pre is to sort of expose the students to that opportunity. And then with a guaranteed placement of those students in a post-apprenticeship program. And they said, we can't find the right person, so we're going to contribute to fixing it, right? I think that's a great model. Great model.
What kind of compensation goes with those kinds of jobs?
With the mechatronics?
Yeah, those, these kinds that are not, there's a big mechanical piece to it, but then you've got to have this technology. Does that give folks a lifelong career, a decent wage?
Yeah, the numbers that they shared for their employees in those categories, I would think they're in the $50,000 range. I think on the low side, when you hear them talk, they really want these folks, and it's a very competitive area. The other thing they point out is that the folks who have that skill that they're looking for are transferable skills to other sectors, non-agriculture, right? You can put that into manufacturing in a lot of different places. So they have struggled with that, but also understand that that's a decision that individuals will make. But yeah, they're very competitive. Yeah.
Did you have a question? I was going to ask a couple questions, if that's all right.
On this or some other topic?
Well, I was going to kind of shift it and talk a little bit about food safety.
I just have a couple of just quick things, and then we'll get into that. I was just curious about the budget situation. How is that affecting your department? We had problems last year. Looks like we might have some problems this year politically. How has that affected? And the cooperative extension issues that we heard a lot about, does that fall under the ag department as well?
Yeah, it does. So it's hard to give a short answer to this, but I'll just say in the 15-16 budget, and part of it was sort of the way it was set up, and keep in mind that the Penn State University, as the land-grant university, receives an appropriation through the Department of Education as part of the non-preferred budget. Okay, it's one of four institutions that are called non-preferred. So the land grant budget was in the Department of Education. The Cooperative Extension and Research, which is the Land Script Fund, was in the Department of Agriculture. And that was a change made in the Corbett administration to really try to protect the cooperative extension and research system. It's the first time it was separated in 144 years. So I say to everybody, I mean, you think about this, right? So the time of Lincoln, we had the Morrill Act, which created our land-grant university system. For 144 years, we kept them together. And 4 years ago, someone said, no, let's split them and have our land grant appropriation in one department and our land script appropriation in another. Don't believe that was the right thing to do or a good idea, because you can't have a land grant without a land script. So in the setup of this, you end up with this sort of tension between how do you manage sort of your land grant investments when it's in two different departments, two different appropriations, very, very different approaches within the state budgeting process for that. But that's the way it was set. So you ended up with this difficulty of managing your land grant investment. The Department of Agriculture, worked with Penn State and legislature to get the $52 million back into the budget. So our budget has that in, right or wrong. I mean, that's where it is at the moment until the legislature sort of wants to sort of move it back and put them back together. But we also have the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary Medical School is in that budget as well, in our budget. It was also a change made 4 years ago. So we, at the end, did fine, budget-wise. Very torturous process to get there. Very difficult because we ended up sort of justifying, I think, for a lot of sort of budget process stuff because of where the land script fund was parked, right, in our budget. That really was a larger budget conversation, but agriculture got tagged with it. So I think we ended up with an increase in the state food purchase program. We started for the first time funding for an agricultural surplus commodity program to feed the charitable food system, which had never been funded before. Additional money on animal health, high-path avian influenza was funded. So when you look at the end, it was fine. It's just trying to manage through with some pretty key public health and safety concerns for nearly 9 months without a budget. And on top of that, take on sort of our land grant system, and every county cooperative extension service and research was part of the department's debate and discussion as well.
Will your department have anything to do with marijuana growing production?
No.
No?
It always sort of pause, right? So you look at the legislation, there's no requirement for the Department of Agriculture to play a role in that. And the belief was that really, was health's domain, health would decide. Well, health has now sort of reached out and asked for help in sort of the agronomic side of the business. It's propagation. So all of those sort of lessons of plant disease and viruses and production are transferable to that crop. So they have asked us for help. At this point, I mean, that's a real-time conversation with Department of Health. What does it look like? How do you certify growers? How do you deal with sort of the crop production? There are no approved chemicals for pest control in marijuana. That was one of the lessons of Colorado. So be very careful, right? You can't spray that crop, right? So if you're using it for medical purposes, there's no chemical there, but it is a crop, which means it's subject to, plant pest disease. So
that'll be an interesting thing going forward.
Be fascinating. Yeah.
So, as you kind of alluded to earlier, the Department of Agriculture includes the Bureau of Food Safety and Laboratory Services, which handles the food health inspections. York Daily Record readers have shown great interest in knowing the inspection histories of restaurants. in Pennsylvania, restaurants don't have to post inspection reports. They do post a notice that says the most recent report is available upon request. I've interviewed some York counties and was unable to find anybody who ever, felt comfortable with that process of going in and requesting a report. Could you help our readers understand what would be behind the decision to require restaurants to keep the reports on hand, but yet make consumers, walk into the building and then also request a report rather than, as many states have adopted, simply posting? What is some of what goes on behind the scenes that maybe readers don't understand about that decision and that process?
Well, important to put this in context. So prior to 2009, when Act 106 passed, and having been at the department previously and tried to manage sort of both the state's responsibilities as well as local municipality food inspection, is that prior to 2009, it basically was whatever, it was organic, right? So whatever local municipality wanted to use in terms of an inspection sheet, they did. And legislature at that time, was very concerned about two things. One, uniformity, and two, having some public access to inspection reports. So what you see in Act 106 was adoption of the Model Food Code, which is the FDA's food code. And that was intentional because we wanted to get away from all of the counties which had an inspection program using their own sort of system. And you wanted to get away from, even at the state level, inconsistencies between sort of how we managed our work. And our work was sort of influenced by where we had jurisdiction, okay? So keep in mind that 50,000 food establishments in Pennsylvania, roughly half of those at the time were under the Department of Agriculture, the other half were local governments. And like the city of York, right? So they have it, they retain it, but until 2009, they would have been two different inspection forms. So you have a model food code, and we felt that was really the right thing to do from a public policy standpoint. There was a debate about a grading system and a posting with that. But again, we came back to the the Model Food Code, which is the FDA, which doesn't have a grading system and doesn't have a posting of the actual inspection report requirement. It does allow for a public posting by way of our inspections online, and it does require that the customer have access to an inspection report, but not the actual inspection report posted. Okay. So, so I always say to folks, you have to back up and say you have 50 years of sort of practice, and in the last couple of years we've really reformed it. But it's also the type of thing where you can continue to improve it.
Sure.
Right? I think there's another generation of this now, just the public access, in what we have seen just in the usage of that online system. So the short answer is, they're posted. They're posted inspection forms online. So if you have a concern, go online and look at it, right? Because it's there. It may not be when you walk in the restaurant and you see it next to the license, but it is posted online.
Yeah, it's interesting putting it in context like that. Kind of tied in with the online aspect, I'm curious as you continue to, as you said, kind of evolve the system.
Mm-hmm.
If there's been, I know I did speak with the director of the Bureau of Food Safety and Laboratory Services, who said there had been some discussions about maybe like a mobile app or something like that that would make it a little bit easier for people who are out and about, actually considering where they might want to go, to be able to easily search. Is that something you're aware of at all, that there are any further discussions about that or other plans that might be?
Yeah, many discussions. I think we have it. It's sort of mobile friendly now. You can go on and to eatsafepa.com and pull it up and look at it. If you really want to navigate those inspection reports, you have to have a little more functionality in that app, right? But I would say, that's what I'm referring to in the next generation. I think it's really is the mobile app friendly that gives you the navigation flexibility you have of the online system now from a desktop.
Have you tried to use the database with a mobile phone?
Yeah.
it's like almost impossible to read it, don't you think? I mean, it's like if we asked you to get the most recent inspection for a restaurant nearby,
Mhm.
do you think you would easily be able to find it or get it? You might be able to find it, but would you be able to read it?
I don't know. I mean, I pulled up one coming through my home county of Adams this morning to check it, and it worked, had access to it, you know, but but then...
You have to kind of move around.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So you're thinking that an app is probably the future here?
I think no question.
Yeah.
I think for us and to Dr. Johnson's sort of discussions with you, I think the challenge we have is the state platform, right? Because there's some infrastructure development that the state needs to do from a security standpoint to protect that data. Okay, we're not alone in that, but the concern has been that if you're going to develop the app, it needs to be on some new infrastructure there, right?
And so am I right in understanding that the context you provided earlier on, because I mean, it's easy enough for somebody who doesn't know that history to come in and say,
Yeah.
well, this could be better. But you're pointing out that, in fact, the post, because I thought this was the case, the posting of the notice itself is a recent development that came with the unification, the 2009 unification of the state system. So
That's correct.
really, we are seeing
what we had pre-Act 106 and post are unrecognizable.
Can you help just the reader
Yeah.
who won't know what Act 106 is?
Yes, Act 106 was the state's food safety inspection reform, and prior to that point, there was no adoption of a model food code. There was no, outside of food safety regulation reference to the FDA, there was no requirement to use that model inspection form. So everybody's trained on that form. If if you're doing food inspection, you have to use that model food code. There was no requirement to post anything. There was no public access prior to Act 106. There was no connection to the employee in having a trained, certified staff member at a restaurant who was food safety credentialed, if you will. Right? No requirement. That was one of the changes of 106. There was no requirement to adopt the changes to food inspection that are driven either out of national federal legislation and or good practices that the FDA ultimately adopts by regulation, is that now that's automatic. So as those changes are made across the country, we get the benefit of that. So I think there's a lot of great changes there. We have two challenges going forward. One is, I think, the use of mobile devices and the finding a way to present very complex information in an inspection form in a readable format. And I think that was the other thing I would say is that you read those forms, and it's a 2-page, fairly complicated.
Well, that touches on one other issue, I suppose, and that's probably the last question I have about this, which is, the some states and metropolitan areas have proposed alternate systems like rating systems and such. I've heard compelling arguments, and I really have no idea. I've heard compelling arguments both ways about the pros and cons of something like that. Is that also something that's been? I know Allegheny County considered implementing something like that, and it didn't happen. Is that something that is on your radar that you have discussed and talked about?
Yeah, we have. This is part of the challenge of the diversity of Pennsylvania. I'll put it this way: it would be easier if you had one single entity, as some states do, that are responsible for food inspection. In Pennsylvania, we have the state may do it or shall do it, but if a local municipality wants to do it, they may do it. Right? So we've got local government influence here. There are some states where it is completely housed in their state departments of health that can sort of set that out as a standard requirement. There's clearly benefits to a simplistic approach, having that sort of be available. I don't know how, what's the right sort of grading system? Do you use a numeric system? Do you simply lift the numeric score off of the model food code score and post that just raw number? And I don't want a grade attached to it. We have others who say, no, you need to translate that number. What's 71 mean, right? What out of what? Is that a C? Is that a B? But I think that's part of that conversation going forward. Is there another way to take this data, final score, and translate that for the public?
Do you have the power to do that as secretary, or is that a legislative?
That's a legislative. Yeah. Well, put it this way: if there was a change to the model food code at the FDA, we would adopt that automatically. Okay.
So you're following essentially FDA.
Yeah. Right. Now, if the legislature wanted to intervene and say, no, we really want to have, we'll take the model food code, but in addition to that, we want to have a provision for a numeric score, a letter grade, that could certainly be done.
And just to be clear, the model food code is a federal proposed food code that states then implement?
Yeah, so it is a model food safety code that is the Food and Drug Administration has, and then they, modify that occasionally, and then we simply incorporate that. But what I say to everybody, if you want to really understand the model food code, it's on 2 pages, and it's our inspection form, right? Because every one of these provisions are pulled out of the FDA model food code. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I noticed, well, we've all noticed about the databases, there's 3 years of data going back 3 years. Is there any reason for that? Is there any particular reason it doesn't go back beyond 3 years for particular restaurants?
I don't know. It's one of those, I don't know whether that's just a requirement or whether we just made an administrative decision to have a 3-year horizon on it.
If I can interject, I think it may be a part of retention records pieces in regards to how long stuff is maintained online. But if you're looking for something further and you contact the press office, we should be able to access that.
Okay. One of the other things that was interesting to me from Brett's report was the number of sort of chronic offenders that we have in York County, and just sort of the issues of trying to go after those who are chronically deficient, and what happens to them in terms of fines or shutdowns and so forth. Are there any kind of changes on the horizon in that regard?
No changes. I mean, we would certainly concur with the frustration of having these repeat offenses. I think the thought at the time was that with the public access to records and all of those inspection forms being online, that would be the power of persuasion to get folks to say, I don't want to be on that list. Get me off of that list, right? And I think it certainly had a major impact.
We just had 2 weeks of no violation inspection reports, haven't we, Brett?
Yeah,
Second week.
everybody's in.
Yeah, right. And in the setup of that, there was a lot of very, very active debate about, what's the penalty structure? When do you apply a penalty structure? How much time do you want to allow for corrective actions? What do you do with things that are corrective on site? All of that was part of the debate. I mean, I think in looking back, while again that context piece is important, knowing what we know today, you can make a compelling case for a more severe penalty structure at the second violation, right? We sort of get to it on the third, but there probably is need to have it on the second, right? Because we probably allow a little more time for corrective action. And made some base assumptions at the time that the public exposure would bring folks in. Secondly, again, to the point of posting inspection reports, again, that was a very active discussion at the time about, if you have it online, do you have to have it in actually posted as part of your license at the facility, and felt like, okay, let's give it a try. Let's try what we've done. But I think you could again come back and say, why not just post the inspection report at the point of access?
Do you agree with that?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, we're in a this is all about knowing who's feeding you, Also, I think it's fair to say that if there are critical violations, I want to know the critical violations. And this is not, it's set up in a way that, you want folks to do what the model food code is required. And it shouldn't be a penalty to meet the model food code. Shouldn't. It's a basic right, so that's how it's set up. If you can't do that, then there's a systemic problem. I mean, there's something going on, either in the training, the facilities, something else is going on. So we should have little tolerance for that.
And yet, what Brett found in his report is that, we had restaurants failing multiple times, 4 or 5, 6, 7 times, I think was the most egregious case we found in New York County over a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
And yet, as far as we know, no restaurants have ever been closed in New York County. What can we do to make sure that situation improves?
Well, I think again, the way this is constructed, you could get to a point where, right now, the closed posting is for those critical violations. And so if those businesses have any of those sort of 8 critical violations, they can be closed. And
I mean, shut down or license revoked, essentially.
yeah, that's very difficult to do. I mean, we're not, and again, this was a point of discussion at the time of the act. I mean, what should be the power of the state to close a business? And how tolerant do you want to be? Is it 3 chances to get it right? Is it 4? Is it 5?
7?
7? That was debated. What is the power? And the belief was that if you would be able to get to a point where you get them into compliance. Is that now the experience? I think we've got a little more of a record of how some businesses have approached their management and the public presentation of food. You can go back and say, we're going to be less tolerant of that. If it's so many violations, critical violations particularly, over a certain period of time and certain recurrence of that, maybe you change to say you get 4 chances or 3 strikes, But that's the way it's set up now. We're very limited. If it's for a critical violation out of the model food code, that you can post the closed by order of the department on the door until it's corrected. But you have those lesser violations that cumulative, right, effect could very easily be a critical violation. But that's not the way it's set up today.
So are the restaurants that are out of violation, are they fined, like the first offense, the second offense? How does that?
Yeah, they are. So my reference earlier was there's no fine for first offense. And they're given an opportunity to bring it into compliance on a second time. Third is when they kick in. So every occurrence after that, there is a penalty structure in the regulation.
So if we get up to, like Scott was talking about, like someone that's 7, they're paying a pretty
Yes,
steep penalty?
yeah, they are. Yeah.
Is there tension between the department or the Department of Food Inspection, might not have the right word,
Yeah.
and the industry? Do you get pushback from restaurant associations or saying, yeah, okay, we have food inspections, and is there sort of give and take there in terms of what's inspected, what's revealed to the public, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's tension. There are tension points, but I would say the driver on the front side to get Act 106 in place was industry who wanted uniformity of the model food code, the adoption of the model food code. So they were an advocate on the front side to say, listen, we're tired of this business, of not knowing what the evaluation is. We don't know the frequency in some cases. We don't know whether the person making the decisions is actually credentialed to make a decision about food safety. So they were drivers on the front side. The tension points have been around what we talked about earlier. Do you have a grade or numeric
Or
posting?
posting, yeah.
What is the appropriate sort of tolerance for compliance or non-compliance? That's been a tension point. And this issue of the public exposure. You know, they weren't necessarily wild about having raw data posted, but they accepted that, and I think if you talk to them today, they would say that's been a very good thing. But they would also share the frustration of having somebody who's been non-compliant 7 times, and they would say, what's that about, right?
Yeah, it makes the industry look bad.
Yeah, it makes them look bad. And I think, you know, to the point that your story raised of where to intervene and what's the appropriate role for, you know, Department of Agriculture or a local health department to actually close a business. I mean, I think you would probably find support today where you've really made a good faith effort to bring somebody into compliance and they haven't done it. In the discussions of Act 106, I mean, that was really a non-starter. But I think you could have that conversation today and probably end up where you and your readers think we should be, where I think the department and our own experiences would say that we've got to do something more than what we've done and the base assumptions we've made around the compliance structure and the public exposure on it gets you a significant way there, but there's still a gap. You still have a gap of folks who either don't understand the responsibility but want to be in the food business, and we've got to have less tolerance for that. And how do you deal with that? Is it you automatically default to a closed by order of and treat them as critical violations? That would be an interesting conversation. That you get 4 runs of it, pick a number, but there is a point where it's going to trip to you're closed until you do correct it, and we're not going to be, you know, continue to be tolerant of it. Why it takes, you know, 7 attempts to get somebody, I mean, that's crazy. But that's where you're structured today, right? So we're hemmed in a little bit by what the regulations allow. But, yeah, so there are a couple of things as you look forward that I think in that next generation, as we get a chance to really look at, you know, food safety, and I would also say increasingly the local jurisdictions are giving their responsibilities back to the Department of Agriculture, either because of model food code, technology requirements, pension issues of employees, equipment issues, et cetera.
Cost and manpower.
Cost of manpower, big driver, right? So we look at the total number of facilities that we've assumed. We picked up one on Monday, another 500 restaurants. The local municipality said we're done. That's 500 more. And when you get these back, you don't get them with a bow on it, right? Because you get them because they probably didn't have a model food code, they weren't right. So you get them and then you have to clean it up. But the point is that when you look at that number of restaurants, it's 8 additional staff it would take to sort of deal with that, the number, not just the one on Monday, but total to date. And we see that as going forward. So the roughly 50% of the restaurants we have when Act 106 passed, you know, over time, we're going to end up with a majority of these restaurants. And how do you, and good and bad points to that, but how do you then manage that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate the time you spent talking to us.
It's good.
about this.
Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. Thank you.